Good morning, 8th grade. It is Wednesday, April 1st. My name is Mr. Frazier, and this is your history lecture. Um, if you want to make some comments in the comment section below, I would appreciate it. If you have any questions or if you have any comments, you can put them in the comment section as that makes sense. Anyways, rambling a little bit, but here we go. We're going to review and we're going to talk about some love drama. Now, we talked last time about the end of the Plantagenet dynasty. The War of the Roses sees the Lancasters and the Lancastrians and the Yorkists fighting it out for the throne. It's like Game of Thrones. And finally, the Yorkists are defeated, and the House of Tudor comes to power. And the first Tudor monarch is Henry VII. Now, he has kind of gone unknown in the popular imagination, but his descendants, the Tudor monarchs, are the most popular kings and queens in history. People know all about this. And it happens mainly because of the love life of one guy. Now, that is Henry VII on the horse, and he is riding to the Canterbury Cathedral. Now, this is going to get filled with drama, and a lot of this stuff sounds like, marital problems, right? People cheating, people getting divorced, all of that kind of stuff, which for regular people doesn't mean a whole lot to a country. It means a lot to the people, but when the king does it, it has much more significance. So, if you're a wife who cheats on her husband, well, that is not cool and you are breaking some commandments. However, you cannot be jailed or punished for that. But if you cheat on the king, well, now that's treason, if that made any sense. So the love life of kings is much more important than the love lives of average people. Now, this is going to sound a little bit like like an episode of Riverdale, but that's what's going on. There are love interests, there are, secret affairs and backstabbing and all kinds of stuff. And that's why people are so attracted to it. Now it all starts. Henry VII had two sons. His older son is named Arthur, and his younger son is named Henry. Now, the princes of England cannot just marry some random chick they see on the street. They can only marry a princess from another country or some high-born noble. And marriages back then were, for the elite, for the nobles, were not about love. It was not about, looking out a window, waiting for somebody, for a knight to come and save you. It was about politics. I want my son or daughter to marry the son or daughter of the most powerful person I can. We'll get money and we'll get more power out of this. So it's not marriage for love. Now, Henry VII marries his oldest son, Arthur, to the daughter of the King of Spain. Now, Spain is the most powerful European country at this time. And so Henry VII gets a lot out of this marriage. In fact, he stands to gain the equivalent of millions and millions of dollars. So he really wants this to go through. Now, this is all important. We'll see later. So Arthur gets married to Catherine of Aragon, the Spanish princess. And they get married, they have the whole ceremony, and that night they have the marriage night. We're not going to get into all that. The next morning, everything seems to be going smooth, seems to be going great. But a week later, Arthur gets very sick and dies. Now, this is terrible, especially for Arthur, but for everybody, because what do you do now with Catherine, with the money? Um, there were very strict laws on getting married and who could be married and what happened to a woman after they had kids or any of those things. It was pretty scandalous. So Catherine is kind of damaged goods, quote unquote, at this point. Um, and Henry VII doesn't want to lose all that money he just got through the marriage. So they make kind of a last minute deal. They will annul, meaning like pretend it never happened, the marriage between Catherine and Arthur, and Catherine will get married to Henry's younger son, Henry. Now, Henry, the son, this gets a little confusing, is a young man at this point. He's probably like 14. And Catherine is probably about 18 or 19. But they get married, and the whole thing with Arthur, they just act like it never happened. The King of Spain's happy, the King of England's happy, Henry's happy, Catherine's happy, everything's great, everybody gets money, everybody gets everything that they wanted, and it all just kind of goes away. But remember that, because later in this lecture, I'm going to refer to Arthur. So remember that name. But for now, everything's smooth sailing. So, Henry VII dies, and his son becomes Henry VIII. In England, they had when a king would die, they would take the crown from his body and give it to the new king, and they would say, "The king is dead. Long live the king," as they gave it to the new one. So it sounds kind of silly, but they would chant, "King Henry, King Henry, King Henry," and King Henry VIII becomes the most famous king of England. Boom, there he is. Now, most people, when they think of Henry VIII now, they think of kind of the big fat guy that he was at the end of his life. But that's not how he is when he's young. When he was young, he was big and strong and athletic. He was awesome at jousting and tournaments, and he played tennis really well. In fact, there's a diary of a diplomat from Italy who said that King Henry, this is a diary, this is private, he's not writing it to somebody else, that King Henry looked like a mighty stag leaping around the tennis courts. So when Henry's young, he is like, he's the ultimate bachelor. He's young, he's handsome, he's rich, he's the King of England. Now, he's married to Catherine of Aragon, which, that's what the king did, right? He has his girlfriends on the side, which, right, that's a double standard, not cool, but if you're the king back then, that's just how it went. But any children that he has only count if they come from his queen, and that's the big deal. Henry has kids with some of his mistresses, but they don't count. They don't get to inherit the crown. The kids only count if they are the son or daughter of the king and queen. And Henry needs a son because he does not want to plunge the war into he does not want to plunge England into another civil war. Remember, his father took the crown by killing King Richard III. And he worries that if he has a daughter, and only a daughter, that somebody could take the crown from the Tudors and make it a different dynasty. And that's his big, big worry. So all of this that we're about to talk about right now, the big concern is Henry is worried that if he doesn't have a son, the throne will go to another family, and he doesn't want that. So at the beginning, he and Catherine love each other. I mean, as much as a king and queen can, and they're happy. He has his ladies on the side, she's the Queen of England, and everybody's rich, and they have a daughter together named Mary. We're going to talk about her later. But they're getting older. Catherine's getting older, and she doesn't have any more kids. He's having kids with all of these mistresses, but she only has one child, and it's a daughter. That's his worst nightmare. And that's where he gets his big kind of beef, his big issue. He wants to have a son, and he cannot have a son, he feels, with Catherine. So he needs to get a new wife, and he falls in love with a woman named Anne Boleyn. And he falls desperately in love with her. But Anne Boleyn is smart and she is ambitious. And she sees how Henry treats his other side girlfriends. He gets what he wants, maybe has a kid, and then sends him off. And she does not want to be used and abused by Henry. So she says that she will never be with Henry unless he marries her. But he can't marry her because he's already married. So she says, get a divorce. Now, today, that may be no issue. But back then, divorce was seen as a big thing. And for the king to get a divorce was seen as a really big thing. And it's an even bigger thing because his wife is related to the King of Spain. The King of Spain is the most powerful king in Europe, if not the world, at this time. They have just started getting gold from the New World. The Habsburgs own the lowlands and Spain, and they are just rich and powerful. So, Henry asks the Pope for a divorce. The Pope, who likes Henry and who understands he's the king, wants to give him that divorce. But the King of Spain says, no, you're not going to let that guy just kick my sister to the curb. And so the Pope says, sorry, Henry, I can't help you out. And Henry is enraged. And he comes up with this plan to use the Protestant Reformation we talked about to get what he wants. Now, we're going to talk more about this in the next slide. Henry will create a new Protestant church. And the only reason that he does that is so he can get a divorce. Back then, you couldn't just go to the courthouse and say, look, my wife and I aren't getting along and we want to get a divorce. You had to get a divorce from the church. And the head of the church was the Pope. So when Henry asks the Pope, can I get a divorce? And he says no, the Pope says no, well then Henry's out of luck. So Henry creates his own church, the Church of England. And in the Church of England, the Pope isn't in charge, the king's in charge. So Henry just has to ask himself, self, can I have a divorce? And he says, of course, self, you can have a divorce. And once he creates the Church of England, he divorces Catherine and sends her off to a convent and disinherits her and Mary. And he and Anne are in love, and they get married, and everything's happy and great. But things don't work out that way. They're happy, they're loved, the bells are ringing. Anne Boleyn gets pregnant, and he's like, perfect, finally, everything's happening. And she has a daughter. Dang it. Now, that's no problem today, but back then, remember, you needed a son to pass on the throne. And he's in the same problem that he had with Catherine now. Anne Boleyn gets pregnant again. But unfortunately, the baby doesn't survive. Happens again. And now, Henry is getting frustrated. He's gone through all of this problem. He's upset the Pope. He's possibly started a war with Spain. He's destroyed his family, all so that he could marry this woman and have a child. Now, you may say, how did he get the grounds to divorce Catherine? Well, remember Arthur? He says, I could never have married Catherine because she was already married to my brother. So that thing that wasn't a problem in the past, he uses it to make an excuse of why he has to divorce Catherine. He can't just say, oh, I want to divorce her because I want to marry this new young hot lady. So he says, she was married to my brother, that's against the rules in the Bible, and he uses that to divorce her. But now he's landed in the same pot with Anne. And so He needs a excuse. He can't just divorce people for no reason. That's not how it worked. So he had the excuse with Arthur in the past, but there is no excuse with his dead brother, with Anne. So he's got to come up with another excuse. And so he accuses Anne of cheating on him. And he says, she's been cheating on me with this guy, her music teacher, and she's been cheating on me, and all kinds of stuff. He even accuses her of cheating on him with her own brother. It's scandalous. And he takes her to court. When you cheat on the king, remember, that's treason. So she's dragged into court, and she says, of course I didn't cheat on you. I've loved you. I've always loved you. That's not good enough. And so she gets sentenced to a traitor's punishment, which is to be hung, drawn, and quartered. But because she's a noble, that means she gets beheaded. Now, being beheaded is still awful, but Henry does seem to be merciful. In fact, he pays money to have a professional swordsman come in from France, and Anne Boleyn is sent to the Tower of London, where she has her head chopped off. So Catherine is divorced and gave him a daughter, Mary I. Anne Boleyn is executed and gave him a daughter, Elizabeth I. Next, he marries a woman named Jane Seymour. And they get married, everybody's happy, and the wedding bells are ringing, and she is pregnant, and she gives birth to a son. And everybody is happy. He has his son. However, she dies while giving birth. And so Jane Seymour, his newest wife, gives him a son, but she dies as well. So now he is back on the market for a wife. Now at this point, he has lost much of his youth and good looks. He has spent all of his time being a king, drinking beer, and he's doing other things, but he's eating a lot of red meat. He's drinking a lot of beer, eating a lot of sweets, and he's put on a lot of weight. But he is the king, so somebody's still got to want to marry him, right? So they look for a new wife, and they find a woman named Anne from the town of Cleves, and she's a princess. Now, today, you could video chat or you could post things on Instagram, but back then, if you were going to get married to somebody you had never seen, you would have your picture painted and their picture painted. And so Henry has his picture painted, and Anne has her picture painted, and they both look at each other's pictures. And obviously their pictures have been photoshopped. Nobody's going to paint Henry the king looking like a big old fat weirdo. And so they Photoshop both of the pictures, and when Anne sees his and he sees hers, they're both, yeah, totally, I'm into that. But when Anne shows up, she sees Henry, and he's not at all what his picture looked like. And the same thing goes for Anne. Henry sees her and says, she's not what I thought she was, and they are both instantly repulsed by one another. In fact, Henry says some rude things about how Anne looks, and Anne is immediately divorced. And probably she's happy about that, and they go their separate ways. So now, Henry, who is older and who is heavier, is once again single. And he wants to get married again. And he sees young, smoking hot Catherine Howard. And Henry is in his 50s now. And like I said, he is heavy. He is suffering from gout, which is a disease of the foot. And Catherine is young. She's like 17. She's beautiful. And he obviously likes her because she's young and hot. She sees he's the King of England. And the King of England who can make her rich and powerful, and so she agrees to marry him. But things do not go well, because he is a gross, grumpy old weirdo at this point, and she is a young, hot lady in the prime of her life. And so while Anne probably didn't cheat on Henry VIII, Catherine Howard surely did. And he finds out, and he's devastated. But of course she did. She's smoking hot young girl who only married you because you're the king and you're a gross old weirdo. But when she is caught cheating on the king is treason. And she begs him, please, I'm sorry, I'll never do it again. But he's so insulted and he's so embarrassed that he sends her to the Tower of London where her head is chopped off. Now he's single again, and he is looking to get married, but at this point he is in a rough state. He has, his gout. He can barely walk anymore. He's even heavier, and he finally gets married to a woman named Catherine Parr. And at this point, she's more of his nurse than his wife, and she takes care of him until he dies. So, Catherine, Anne, Jane, Anne, Catherine. The way to remember it is divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, survived. That's the rhyme. Catherine was divorced, Anne was beheaded, Jane died in childbirth. Anne was divorced, Catherine Howard was beheaded, and Catherine Parr survives. It's kind of macabre, but those are the wives of Henry VIII. All of that drama so that he could have a son. Henry's love life, his political life, and religious life were all intertwined. Because he's the king, like I said, if you cheat on him, that's treason. When the king gets married and has children, well, his children are the new kings. That's politics. And when he becomes the head of the church, well, his religious life, when he gets married or he gets divorced, that is now church policy. So it's not just like, ooh, man, look who he got married to, look who he cheated on. These are official church things. These are official English times. And so he has such absolute power that historians refer to this as Tudor absolutism. Now, those are his wives, but remember, all of it was for the kids, was so that he could have a son. And we're going to wrap it up with this. Tomorrow or on Friday we'll talk about his children. This is a picture of when he's younger. He's not as heavy. He's probably my age, in his 30s at this point. Now, when Henry was young, he was a staunch Catholic. He was Catholic. England was Catholic. And his wife, Catherine, at the time, was Catholic. Religion is going to play a big part in this chapter. Catholics and Protestants. Remember, Protestants are all Christians who are not Catholic. So Anglicans, Lutherans, Lollards, all of them are Protestants. When he was young, and Martin Luther was starting the Protestant Reformation, Henry VIII hated it. He said, how could this German monk challenge the Pope? How could this be going on? And he wrote a book, a whole book, called In Defense of the Seven Sacraments. And he was saying why the Catholic Church is the only true faith, and he condemns Luther. And the Pope is so happy with him that he names him, he gives him official title of Defender of the Faith. And so Henry is a Catholic champion for the first half of his life. But when he needs to get a divorce and he cannot get that from the Pope, he turns everything on his head. The Pope rules absolutely in religious matters. And when he says Henry can't get a divorce, that's the end of it. So Henry decides to change the whole thing. This is a big deal. It seems like nothing to us today, but for all of the people living in England, they were Catholics. They believed that if you weren't a Catholic, that you were going to hell. So when Henry says, none of you are Catholics anymore, you're all now Protestants, this was huge. It was like the biggest thing that had ever happened to England at that point. And it takes a lot of doing. And so there's some other guys like named Thomas Crown, we're going to talk about him on Friday, that help him do it. But the official title is called the Convocation. Parliament and the Archbishop of Canterbury give Henry the Convocation, and that states that using Luther's theories that the Pope is not the head of the church. The Pope is just some other dude, another Christian. And it says the head of the church is actually the King of England. And so when they convocate Henry, they make him not only the head of the state, the head of England, but the head of the church. And so now Henry can appoint bishops. He can set new church practices and new church law. He doesn't have to pay any of the Catholic priests. And he takes all of the money from the Catholic Church in England. He takes all of the monasteries. He kicks out anybody who won't go along with it. And he has the 6 articles created. The 6 articles are the rules for the Anglican Church. And they're almost exactly the Catholic. Remember, Catholic has 7. These has 6. And everything is almost exactly the same. The only difference is who's in charge. In Catholicism, it's the Pope. In the Anglican Church, it's the King. So he basically just takes the whole Catholic Church, chops off the head, and puts his own head there. And that's it. That's the English Church. So when we move forward and we talk about his descendants, his son and his daughters, and the Stuarts, there's going to be this problem. Are we Protestant or are we Catholic? And people will die, people will fight, people will kill to decide if England is going to be a Catholic country or a Protestant country. And it's ironic that this whole thing starts not because Henry is like, how dare the Catholics try and sell salvation? How dare their hypocrisy? He wants to get a divorce. And so he changes the whole deal. Anyways, sorry that the video's up a little bit late. I had some technical issues. I hope you guys are doing well. I can't wait till we're back in class and everything is back to normal. Praying for you. Have a great day. I will see you soon.